Hello everyone again. So who have joined the previous session, now you see me again. I'm Long from Asia Pacific University. So welcome to our APU and Industrial Career Live webinar session now. So now is our fourth session for today. For those who have missed out the previous session, even for yesterday as well, feel free to go and watch the replay at our Facebook page and YouTube channel. All right. So while we're actually waiting for more to come, basically this webinar series will be actually until tomorrow. So there will be it will be covering in the field of data science, cybersecurity, AI, engineering, actuarial studies, psychology, design, and also now will be fintech. So for those actually interested in finance, accounting, banking, now this is a session for you. So while waiting for more people to join our live session today, I would like to invite all of you to join our APU Open Days. Our counselors are ready to actually guide you through all the pathways available for your further study. So especially for those actually getting your SPM result recently. All right. For more information and updates, please feel free to visit our website at www.apu.edu.my and also follow our Facebook page. So today, I'm actually very proud to have Professor Dr. Nafis, our head of school for School of Finance, and also Mr. Rizwan, who is from FAOM, the Fintech Association of Malaysia, to tell us more on fintech and futures of financial services. Welcome, Mr. Rizwan and Professor Nafis.
Thank you, Long.
Thank you, Long.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. The topic is very interesting, and we are going to talk about fintech and the future of financial services. If we look into the financial services, this is one of the most fastest moving industry at the moment. Every day, new products, new services, and new regulations are coming up into the market. For example, you must have heard that Malaysia is going to start with the digital banking next year. We can see some new products like NFT, BNPL, all coming into the market. And if we look into the overall ecosystem of financial services, things are moving at a rapid pace. And that also brings about how the industry will shape in the future. and what role the future finance graduates are going to play in the market. And who will be the best person to talk about who has played all the part of this financial ecosystem? Mr. Ridwan, who is acted as a regulator, acted as a technopreneur, and acted as a driver of the Fintech Association in Malaysia. So please join me, Mr. Ridwan, for this session. Just a bit of background about Mr. Ridwan. Mr. Ridwan has over 20 years of commercially driven regulatory compliance and technology experience, not only in Malaysia, but in the whole region, Asia Pacific. He is currently the Malaysia country director and head of ASEAN business for World Remit, a remittance startup, as well as the board member for CAF Investment Bank, AKRU Robo Advisory, and Ethis World Ventures. He is the ex-president. He just gave up his role as the president of FAOM, and now he is the current board member of the Fintech Association of Malaysia, the only organization which represents all the fintech startups in the country. And his role mostly focuses on raising the profile of Malaysia, particularly on promoting the combination of onshore, Labuan midshore, as well as the Islamic digital economy. Mr. Ridwan has worked as the international advisor for the Labuan Financial Services Authority and has been the member of Malaysian Innovation Policy Council in 2013 and 2016. In fact, Mr. Ridwan also founded regulatory technology advisory firms, RHT Compliance Solution, as well as the CS Technology Solution. In 2017, Mr. Ridwan was the CEO of Sedania Salam Capital Center in Berhad. In his regulatory role, he was the regulator with the KLSE back in 1998 during the height of the Asia financial crisis, and who will know better to look into the regulation when the crisis struck a country. He also represented Security Commission in 2001 and was redeployed to join task force between Security Commission and Bank Negara Malaysia during the formation of the investment banking concept way back 20 years ago. Mr. Ridwan has graduated from University of Wales with a BSc in economics, majoring in accounting and finance, and obtaining an MBA in MIS from the IIUM. So you can see he carries a depth of experience, and who will be the best person than him to talk about how the industry will shape in the years to come. So please join me in inviting Mr. Ridwan. Floor is yours, Mr. Ridwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nafis, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining APU Live 2021 and Industry Career Webinars. Let me share my screen for me to talk through in terms of some of the items that I really want to share with all of you. Bear with me in terms of All right, I think the screen that I want to share is up there, hopefully. So let me start sharing some of the things that Professor Nafis mentioned just now. So as you can see, fintech is fairly new things, but it has taken the world rapidly in many aspects. And today, what I'm trying to do is to share little experience that I have in terms of what has changed and the context of where the changes are, and how that impact us either in certain perspective. I will share with you in terms of different perspective of how the impact are. And what do we do as well is in the same manner and perspective, because I'm not just going to share with you the information, but I'm going to share also about how these changes and impact actually would drive and structure our mindset, behavior, and the career choice that we're going to take going forward, and also the benefit and the risk that comes along with it. So the changes that happens actually, as you can see, it is really in twofold. One, on us as a customer to the financial services, and as well as to those who are providing that services to us, the banks, the fund management company, and all those companies that's regulated by the two financial regulator in Malaysia, Bank Negara and the SC. So as far as the empowerment to the customer, so as you can see, financial technology or fintech really empower us in terms of how we actually are now being served by the incumbent financial services as well as the new players that's coming into the industry. So there's a lot of things that we need to understand from a customer standpoint, whether are we ready to unlearn what we already know about financial services and shape our expectation and behavior and relearn new things about the rights, the benefit, and the risk that comes along with it. And this knowledge is rapidly changing almost on a daily basis. And we really need to understand where this knowledge is coming from, whether it is authentic, whether it's credible or not, and the risk that comes with it. And moving on to the part where the supply of these services is coming from, many, if not all, the financial services that's deploying fintech are untested innovation. They have yet to go through a full economic cycle. And this is where the concern basically on whether these innovation could shape responsible behavior, could actually be deployed in ethical manner, and the customer centricity is not biased because now with the volume of data that's available, many of the features of the fintech services can be skewed towards certain interest group depending on time, depending on the motivation of these financial services. So I just want to bring you to the key aspect in terms of a few things. There's a lot of aspect that I put there, but in terms of perspective, I would ask myself as a consumer, are we ready to be given a new tools, and how do we know that we can use this tool in the right way and to serve and optimize our benefit? And when it comes to the provider of the financial services, the business model have changed, and so does the risk that come with it. Are we ready to understand and embrace and manage this risk effectively? When we talk about customer centricity, it doesn't come one way, it comes two ways. For you to be able to get all the benefit, the sacrifice that they want from you is for you to share your data. So not everybody is agreeable to this. And a lot of those empowerment comes with what we call buyer beware philosophy. You are given the information, you are given all the disclosure. Are you able to understand about the risk of entering into that online transaction? And last but not least, on trust. This is a very critical factor, especially if you're talking about a huge amount of value that you are transacting online, particularly if you're dealing with banks and huge amount like in wealth management or investment management. So these are some of the changes. Yeah. And then on us, the impact of digitalization, fintech, techfin, summing it up into the financial services. The key highlight that all these financial services providers are saying is they want to solve the gaps in the market. They want to make sure that financial inclusion is given to the unserved and the underserved, and they also want to focus on social finance. This sounds very familiar to some of us, but sounds very unfamiliar to our fathers and those who live outside of the urban areas. So this perspective on the impact is about knowing and understanding the benefit, the risk. And when I put their start point is where do we start to understand, to know, and to get all this information for us to be able to cope with these rapid changes. And the risk, as I said just now, data is about sharing and about knowing where it is becoming public and where does it remain actually private. And do we have the right to recall the data that we have shared? Because in Malaysia at this point of time, the right to recall your data that has gone public is not actually written in the PDPA, the Personal Data Protection Act. And the disclosure that has been made by the financial services providers as per the regulatory requirement is very, very vague and very, very subjective. The rules are there, but interpretation and application of these disclosures are sometimes very mixed in terms of whether the presentation is in font 6 and in lengthy and in languages that we may not understand. And normally it's in a sentence structure that is very complicated and hard to be understood. And the risk of what if we decide we do not want to change and remain status quo, what would happen in terms of the impact? We will discuss about that, and I hope you would ask some question on that. And when we talk about relevancy, am I actually included in all these changes and how we actually want to be included? This goes back to 2 points in terms of where are the start point and whether we want to remain status quo or not. And where and how do I fit in? That's the next question after you've decided that you do not want to remain status quo, but you want to join it. So how do you fit in? And for specifically the accountants, are you still going to be relevant? These are the 2 questions that you're going to ask in terms of how am I going to be included and how do I do that in terms of making my career as an accountant or anyone who is involved in providing financial services to be still relevant going forward. And the way forward we look at it is now the theme about responsible finance and the theme about value add, especially if you look into the Islamic banking and services. There's a theme called value-based intermediation that needs to be looked at that actually becomes the main thesis of this value add idea, as well as in terms of how do you then make sure that all these are properly shared with the target segment that you want to share. Impact on key elements. So these are some of the elements that we saw, or that we have seen from the analysis that has been done by the Fintech Association in terms of talent, the narrative, the technology, the funding, the work culture within organization, as well as the regulatory landscape. And the future is now, as far as talent is concerned, there's no more thinking about this impact will be coming in the next 1 or 2 years. The impact is already happening now. And you need to actually embrace ultra learning, high speed learning in terms of catching up with the voluminous information that's coming through. And the narrative keep changing. You hear ESG, you hear deep tech, you hear VBI, and soon you will hear new things. Believe me, next week you will hear new things. I don't know, you probably would heard a term called WITT, WITT, which I will share with you later. And technology, in terms of how the technology, as far as we are at the Fintech Association trying to do, is to make sure that the technology being introduced need to be for human. Thus, this is not innovation for the sake of innovating, but we want to make sure that the technology that has been and will be deployed and created is for value, is going to be for humanity. And this is a role that many are now contemplating to take. Whether if you are innovating, are you going to become a challenger to the industry that's already there, or do you want to become a collaborator with the incumbent that's already in the market? So these are among the key impacts that we have analyzed and continue to observe and share with a lot of the key stakeholders in the financial services in Malaysia. So what do we do? So this is where the perspective that I mentioned just now. Do you want to become a challenger? Do you want to become a collaborator? Do you still want to look for employment? Or do you want to try out and become an entrepreneur? So if whatever that you want to choose, these 4 things you need to consider. The mindset that you need to have in terms of your willingness to unlearn and relearn new things. And people always say about pivoting, but the requirement when you are in a fast-paced environment is, are you willing to pivot whatever that you believe at the beginning, and halfway point you will pivot again? Just to share with you, in Google, they pivot every 30 days. They don't stick to what they said on day 1, and by the 30th day, they will change and pivot, and to make sure that they really shape the requirement that the customer wants. And you also need to collaborate, because you're never going to be able to succeed if you try to do it alone. That's the kind of things and the kind of mindset that you need to have, either as a challenger, collaborator, employee, or as an entrepreneur. And you need to make sure that you align your mindset with the demand and the supply side. That's why the first slide I put up there is about the customer as well as the provider. And you need to also understand that transitioning to become someone who is embracing digitalization is talking about someone who are digitally native, the younger generation now, who probably at the age of 2 or 3, their parents already gave them handphone, compared to people like me, a digital migrant who probably have their first handphone when they were aged between 30 to 35. So these are two different mindset and two different set of approach that you need to align. And when you talk about narrative, whether you are an accountant, whether you are a financial service provider, you need to make sure that your value proposition needs to be aligned with the two things that I said earlier, the mindset and the alignment. Okay. And you need to be solution driven. You cannot be putting profit and money at first. You must be solution driven for people to trust you, because in financial services, it's all about trust. And now it's also about social finance, where you must bring impact to the society for you to be accepted and for you to be trusted. And you cannot actually just maintain or just think that you can survive locally. You need to be able to have a strategy to scale, no matter whether you are an employee or you are an entrepreneur. The ability to scale also need to be aligned and need to be understood. Whether are you growing too fast? Are you growing too slow? Because growing too fast, that means there will be certain compromise that happen. And use example, what happened to WeWork is an example of growing too fast, and they ignore a lot of the governance, risk, and compliance aspect that eventually brought them down. And you must continue to value create in terms of your approach, and look at from a commercial perspective whether your revenue is able to sustain your burn rate. And if you do not make it, or you make it, you need to have a clear exit strategy on how this is going to be done. Okay, I'm going to come to one of the interesting facts. This is the focus in terms of how Malaysia is looking at where the financial services is going to be expanded. These are the focus of the SC and the central bank in terms of looking at what are the specific areas that they're going to actually enhance from now until probably for the next 5 years. The next generation payment, for example, it's talking about consolidating the ecosystem. So you need to understand, this is not just talking about bank and non-bank, but also talking about the infrastructure that supports, okay, the capabilities of these financial services. So you need to also understand about the platform like PayNet and how that platform integrate with other similar platform in other countries to allow domestic payment and international payment to be done electronically, digitally, in a secure and safe manner. When you talk about digital asset, everybody now goes into trying to trade in Bitcoin, Litecoin, and you name it. But you need to understand that it doesn't work if the ecosystem is not mature. And that's the key concern now that a lot of government has, especially the central bank, in terms of making sure that there's a compelling infrastructure and sufficient infrastructure that is safe for digital asset to be allowed to go into the mainstream. And I just want to also touch on the RegTech and the SupTech, regulatory technology and the supervision technology that the regulator needs to have. Because if the industry is moving so fast, but the regulation is not, then the innovation that we have will actually go into a bottleneck. And this is what we saw happen about 4 years ago. And this is where we advise the regulators to focus on analytic-driven embedded RegTech and SupTech that could facilitate authorization, supervision, and enforcement. These are the basic function of any regulators anywhere in the world, where they authorize through licensing, where they supervise through their audit and check, and they enforce any wrongdoing that's deliberate and of criminal nature in the court of law. So these are the things that we need to focus on, and we have advised the key stakeholders about it. So these are the future development about what's going to happen from now until 2025. I just want to focus on a few things like currently, as Professor Nafi said, banking, insurance, and takaful is going to be digitalized and new licenses is going to be issued. Digital asset, I know that the Securities Commission is now going to look into the IEO via secondary platform through the RMOs and through the existing license holders. And more development is going to happen based on the digital asset technology in terms of creating capabilities of making sure that there's more interoperability between the traditional way of doing financial services with the new way that's based on digital asset, DLT, and the blockchain technology. And this is where, when you talk about interoperability, this is not just connecting microservices or API. We are talking about embedding and augmenting all these at every level, from the customer level to the businesses level, industry, as well as between different countries' ecosystem. So there's a lot of elements that we need to understand, and how those elements are impacting us, no matter whatever perspective or role that we want to choose going forward. So the benefit and risk, the last thing that I want to share is not about a destination. It's about being empowerment. That means you need to always learn and continue to learn. There's no such thing as I finished my learning process. I am still learning. I started coding very, very late, but I still need to do it, and I need to read books every week, actually. With, that means what if this and what if that. This is a design of how you do your user interface and user experience for your customer to have the choice of choosing between this and that. Okay, so if let's say you're going into an Islamic product, they would have a choice and information about, do I choose a contract that's based on ijara? Do I choose a contract based on wakala? For me to be able to then decide whether I want to choose this or whether I want to choose that. That's one example of how empowerment is happening. And if we do not have knowledge, then that will be very difficult for us to understand and make a decision, an informed decision on what kind of financial services do we want. Transparency, you can see now a lot of financial services are now laying it out there, no hidden costs, and you need to be objective in terms of if you want to enjoy the benefit. And of course, people look for cost effectiveness, which is now happening. If you look at, especially in the remittance side, the cost has reduced way below from what it was before, and the target is to get it below 3%, which Malaysia already have achieved. Okay, and of course, all of these exist on your digital device as long as you have it, because it's a choice that you can make in terms of whether you want to have it on apps or on the web. But the risk is you always play catch up, okay? Because this innovation happen almost on a daily basis, as I said. And you need to choose which one do you want to take and which one do you want not to take. And cyber threats, that's really given, because once you are connected, a lot of things can happen. And a lot of that happen because it's a black box approach. You don't really know what's going on behind the scene. And this is where knowledge about what's going on needs to also be part of and parcel of how we unlearn and relearn new things. I'll stop there. I think I take too much time already. And yeah, let's go for a discussion with Professor Navis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ridwan. That was insightful. I think before starting, I think I should use the privilege of being the moderator, and I have some burning questions for you. And this is always going to be fascinating. One thing which I always hear from my student or my community who talks about fintech in general there is a fear that there is always a this slang FOMO, fear of missing out in the industry, both from the provider perspective and both from the user perspective. Now, provider think that since many companies, many existing incumbents are going for digitization or collaborating with fintech startup, they have to join the rat race. At the same time, at the user perspective, if you talk to that, have you used any new startup platform, or are you using any wallet, and what can be that reason to do that? Sometimes you say, oh, I'm not part of that community. So that FOMO is happening in the industry from both perspectives. So how do you look as the industry player here to see that where to bridge that gap of bringing the right player and the right user into the industry, Mr. Ridwan?
Thank you, Professor. That's really great question. Okay, so the thing is, when we look at bringing in regulated financial services, the first few things that we look at is into looking at whether there's a real relevant value for Malaysia and for Malaysian. That's one thing that we look at. So we don't really want to bring in all types of innovation and all types of advancement, technological advancement, just because other people are doing it. I think if you look at the kind of, I just want to bring you an example, the kind of digital bank in Hong Kong and the kind of digital bank conceptually approved in Singapore is going to be very different in terms of how it is going to be approved in Malaysia. In Hong Kong, based on the research and analysis that I do, we notice that there is very little concern, although everybody is talking about financial inclusion, underserved and unserved, but in the optic and the actual approach of those who are already licensed at the digital bank in Hong Kong, we have not seen any different from the existing or the incumbent financial services. So in Malaysia, when we talk about digital bank as an example for bringing in innovation, we want to make sure that the optic is different, the value is different, and it's definitely going to make sure that the unserved and the underserved would be able to get the benefit because the gap is clear. They are not being served by the incumbent. So the mission is clear for the digital bank to serve this group of people, the segment that has been neglected, so that everybody would be given access to financial services, both on deposit, both on the lending side, as well as elevating their livelihood going forward when they get involved with the financial services. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Ridwan. I completely understand. It's like a catching game happening in the industry overall, and I believe that all nation, if you are not going to catch up with the technology, you will be left behind. This is a time where it's not about only about the economic growth, but also to be part of the digitized world. And if any country is not following that trend, the industry as well as the economy will be at the backlog. I will try to take up some questions from the audience, Mr. Ridwan, now. And Mr. Lung, if you can bring some questions to the front and let the speaker ask about it. So yeah, Mr. Manbiro has asked a question that we have observed traditional banks have started accelerating their digitization process, leveraging on eKYC and development. How will aspiring digital banks be a threat to the existing bank, especially when Malaysia is going to give up 5 licenses next year?
Yeah, good question. You said you have observed traditional banks starting to digitalize their processes, and in the same question, you're also saying that digital bank could be a threat to them. So you need to understand that digitalizing processes doesn't mean that they will become a digital bank. The framework of the incumbent banks, okay, the traditional bank is, if you notice, you go to the bank, what they do is they will push their product and services. They don't really know who you are. What they do is they send you SMS blast and then send you email saying that, do you need credit card? Do you need this and do you need that? without really understanding who are these people and why do they actually consider those SMS blast or whatever notification that you send. The difference with the digital bank is they will use data that's relevant, that's publicly available, that's legal for them to use to actually make sure that the relevancy and the value is going to be delivered to the group of people that would need what they need to enhance and elevate their livelihood. So this can't be solved by just doing digitalization of processes. Yeah. So that is one area where it will take a long time for the traditional bank to be able to do, because the legacy system that they have, the core banking system that they have, the number of the way they do banking, as well as the capital expenditure and operate that OPEX that they have is super huge compared to the digital bank. On average, the digital bank would run on capex OPEX that is probably 70% at least cheaper compared to the traditional bank. And if you look at it from a manpower perspective, based on what we saw in Hong Kong, I just asked a few of them. I said, how many employees do you have as a digital bank? On average, they have about 300 employees. If you ask Maybank, CIMB, or any bank, any traditional bank, can they run on 300 people? They can't. So these are definitely seen as a threat, but these are decisions that traditional bank can take, but at what cost? And there's not just a commercial cost, there are also social impact, and there's probably hidden political impact as well if they decide to transform and become a digital bank in a short time. So that's my answer to this.
I just want to follow up on that. I was listening to the conversation with Suhaimi Ali, the BNM director, a couple of days back on the fireside chat, and he was mentioning that there's a huge interest in terms of the licensing. More than 40 applications have already come in, and it is mostly coming from the non-banking or financial services industry. Maybe they have, for example, like Sunway wants to go into Petronas, are looking for that. MyG is looking for that. So imagine if we give out 5 licenses and we already have 10 full-fledged commercial bank, ignoring the foreign banks and ignoring the Islamic banks entities. That's going to increase the number of banks in Malaysia. So again, we are not looking at the number of user or customer to increase overnight 5-fold, or to have at least 20% increase. So when we have like 15 commercial banks, 10 full-fledged, and then 5 digital banks, the market is going to be very competitive. How does it really affect the overall banking ecosystem within Malaysia in terms of the jobs, in terms of the credit, in terms of the cost attached to these services? So that will be interesting to know, Mr. Rizwan.
Yeah, that's very good perspective, Professor. I just want to start with, if you look into Singapore and Hong Kong market, Hong Kong has about 7.5 million people. Singapore has about 5.5 billion people. Hong Kong alone, they have 160 banks. Singapore has almost 114 banks. For such a small nation, they have a huge number of banks that's operating in these two countries. Malaysia, as you said, only have not more than maybe 20 banks at this point of time. And adding the 5 would give maybe mid-20 numbers, maybe about 23 or 24 banks, including Islamic bank. So I think the space for bank to actually create value is still large, because we have almost 32 to 33 million people, although more than 90% of us in Malaysia has access or a bank account. But if you go one level deeper, you notice that the services is not up to the par, and the services is really not elevating the livelihood of almost 70% of those who has a bank account. So This is the gap that actually tried to be filled by 5 new digital banks. So if I think about 15 that's already now in the market could not address the 70%, it's a huge opportunity for these 5 to actually address this if they understand well in terms of not just the market opportunity, but also in terms of how to tackle and transition these customers to become digital savvy. So that's why I mentioned just now about digital native and digital migrant. A lot of people are digital migrant at this point of time. Those who have bank account are people who are already in the maybe in their 40s, and they need to be migrated to become a digital customer. So these are the key challenges that the traditional bank can't do, and hopefully the 5 digital bank can do. And this is a huge opportunity for them, because I believe going forward, maybe in the next 10 years, there will be more license that will be given out, because I'm sure Malaysia population will grow beyond 32 to 33, maybe up to 40 million in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. I think we have a diverse audience here, and they are okay. I think Lung has first put crypto, but I will take the accounting question first, Lung. So there are some people who are looking from the accounting sector is asking that how fintech will affect an accountant. From a couple of people have similar question, yes, and how does the accountant fit into the changes? Again, we are looking at the overlapping financial services industry as a whole. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think accountant as a function is needed, no matter how the financial services is going, the landscape is changing. But the thing that you need to really look at is in terms of understanding what are the micro changes that has impacted the businesses, the financial service providers, and the need for them to actually know going forward. One example is, let's say, for example, now, if a fintech company come and approach you as an accountant and ask, how do I value my company? You cannot simply use the theoretical aspect of accounting of using cash flow, profit, and whatnot in terms of valuing this fintech company. Case as an example, Grab, the popular Grab platform is not a profitable company. And if you actually evaluate Grab, you will not believe that now they are valued at almost 14 billion US dollar. Where does that value come from? So in a traditional accounting perspective, a traditional accountant would say Grab actually is not valued at 14 billion. But the new way of looking at it is they look at the potential of Grab in terms of the coverage that they have, in terms of the quality of the data that they are managing, and in terms of the services that they have actually offer on their platform, and the ability of their technology to do what we call mass customization. You can see that if you have the opportunity later to travel to another country that has Grab services, you can see that it is different from one country to another. Even if you use Grab food, if you change the address, the name of the restaurant will change. These never happened before. And these are value that you need to put, because the innovation actually bring value to the customer. Yes, the formula in terms of matching the revenue and making it profitable is still not there yet, but the potential in terms of this revenue turning the company into profit depends on whether you look at EBITDA or you look at gross level, or and you need to also understand, for fintech company, one of the highest costs is the CAC, customer acquisition costs, as well as looking at the LTV, the customer lifetime value, in terms of connecting themselves to the platform. So these are two things, just for an introduction, that has never been considered in the traditional accounting sense. And the burn rate that they have in terms of the number of people, resources, and the R&D that they need to do for them to be able to continuously create value and making sure that the revenue is enough to cover at least the burn rate. So all these need to be taken into account in terms of when you apply your accounting knowledge for company like Grab. That's just one example in terms of looking at valuation. So what if, let's say, for example, Grab want to merge with Gojek in Indonesia? That will create a whole host of a different dynamics in terms of how do you do merger and acquisition. So for an accountant to not actually follow the concept, the new things and the new dynamics, it will be something that you would lose, and remaining status quo actually is not an option. You need to understand what are the micro changes that's impacting these businesses and why actually it is seen in a very polarized manner in terms of, although it is not profitable but valued at a very high value like Grab, for example. So these are the kind of changes that you need to do, unlearn, relearn, for you to fit into the new scenario.
I think, yeah, Mr. Ridwan, you have potentially wiped off few hundred millions of Grab future market value already. It's like the Ronaldo effect happening on the, our discussion right now, talking about Grab is not profitable. But that's the fact what you mentioned. And again, accountant not only to look at the value of the firm, they also need to look at how do they even audit the firm, for example, with the technology embedding into how do you track those fraud, or looking into the detecting of the scam, or not putting in the right value. So definitely that will be an interesting area to look into. We cannot have a fintech discussion without having a discussion of cryptocurrency. That's the flavor of the industry. So there are a couple of questions on that, and somebody, Iril, is asking about that. Will cryptocurrency somewhere replace money in the future? So again, an interesting question, Mr. Rizwan.
Yeah. Okay, you need to understand that for digital currency to replace the fiat currency, and you need to go back to the basic of what is currency. Currency actually is an instrument that could become a value storer that actually acceptable by everyone, and it has a wide use cases and able to be tracked in the economic sense of looking at it from M1, M2, M3 in terms of money circulation perspective. So if you look and map all those points on cryptocurrency, you can see that the infrastructure that they have is not yet ready. And when you talk about storing value, the volatility of the value is too erratic for it to be able to behave like a currency. You can see that Bitcoin move as high as 30% in a day, and then it goes down again, and that is not a typical behavior of any currency in anywhere in the world. And at this point of time, a simple tweet from Elon Musk would change the daily value and the valuation of certain currency. That is really not acceptable by any currency that's now circulating in the world. So there's a lot of areas where needs to be looked at. And I know, and I'm sure you heard the discussion with Swami 2 days ago that Professor mentioned just now, that Bank Negara is looking at it. And the first port of call in terms of looking at cryptocurrency as a replacement of money in future is looking at it from what we call a CBDC aspect. Okay, crypto based. It's a crypto that is issued by the central bank. Okay, central bank digital currency, CBDC. So that would give credibility, that will give trust, and that will give confidence for the economy to start accepting. And these need to be looked at least based on those key factors that I mentioned just now about the stability in value, the acceptance, the infrastructure, and in terms of circulation. Because at this point of time, when you talk about M1 in terms of money circulating in the market, it consists also deposit. So digital currency now is not deposited into the mainstream financial services. So that needs to be also thought through in terms of how the traditional Finserv need to actually able and has the infrastructure to accept digital currency as part of deposit. So there's quite a few things that needs to happen, but I believe in future, not too soon, this would probably will happen. Yeah.
Sure. I think this was more from the economics or economic perspective, but we do have investors also on board here. And one of the question here from Ms. Huishen is the sustainability of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin in the future. Looking like she want to invest into the Bitcoin and looking want to whether she should be doing it or not. So do you think if we are talking again in next 5 years, Bitcoin will be still there at the peak of 35, 50?
Well, I always ask this question. I haven't gotten the answer to whatever Bitcoin, whatever cryptocurrency that we are talking about, not just Bitcoin. One of the fundamental questions I always ask is, where does the value of this cryptocurrency coming from? If you look at the fiat currency, it comes from the notional value of the country that it represents. So you do have a basis in terms of where does ringgit draw its values. It is talking about representation of the value of the economy of Malaysia. But when you apply the same question to cryptocurrency, I haven't gotten a convincing answer about where does the value come from. And the fact and the evidence that Elon Musk's his tweeting actually affected the price, that really scares me, because I'm looking at it from the lens of either as an accountant or as an economist or someone who probably have some little knowledge about how currency is being built and being established and the ecosystem behind it. So this really is a question that needs to be answered convincingly for cryptocurrency to be sustainable going into the future. So if you think that you want to invest into any type of cryptocurrency, be prepared to lose all that money, because when you also need to know that there's only 3 digital asset exchanges approved by the SC in Malaysia: Synergy, Luno, and Tokenize. Any other names, okay, is not approved by the regulator. And why this is important is because if you lose money on these 3 platforms, you still have a recourse or a place for you to actually bring your case to the SC as a consumer. But if you traded Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency not through these 3, there's no protection for you from the regulators because they are not licensed by the SC. So be very careful about where do you want to trade, and please get the answer on where does this cryptocurrency get their value from.
Your statement remind to come up with a new term. We heard about masking the price, but now we are going towards masking the price. Especially in the Bitcoin terms. There's a very interesting question here by Sangeet Gill, who is asking that do you think fintech as an innovation, future of money, or mode of bringing social change? This is talking about how our society will look like due to the advent of fintech, and that's very important. But it cut across every sector of the economy.
Yeah, I believe that fintech can bring a lot of positive changes as long as the innovation is done responsibly. Okay, you can disrupt, but you need to disrupt responsibly. So just an example, you know hackers, they are responsible hackers and they are also hackers. Okay, so those who are responsibly hacking, they would try to make sure that the cyber security framework is really good for unnecessary cyber risks to be managed. So if you can innovate, if you can really use technology, you have a choice. Do you want to do good things, or do you want to not do good things? That's the first question. And then when you decided that even if you want to do good things, who and for what are you doing the good things? So this is where a lot of the innovators out there, they started by saying, I want to solve this problem and that problem. The moment they get into the commercial side, they seems to lose focus and start thinking about how do I make the most money for myself and for my business. And they start losing the focus on how do I create value for the social and for humanity. So these are the challenges in terms of the journey. It's not just about I'm starting to innovate, but the temptation for you to stay on the course and make sure that you actually continue to bring value, that will determine whether it will actually bring social changes or not going forward. And it's like having a superpower. Once you have it, it's up to you to use it. And if you abuse it, then the social change will be negatively felt by others.
Yeah.
So when you innovate, you need to make sure that you stay on the course.
And your statement made me to think again whether anonymous group is a responsible hacker or a bad hacker. I will just need to go back and look at that. In that similar context, one of our audience did made a comment that when changes or transformation are needed all the time, the gap between the rural areas and city will be enlarged. The following, and you did talk about that, So I will, keeping the time in concern. We only have 4 minutes to go. One final question, which is very thought provoking, I saw in the earlier, and this is also a question which everybody do ask, that will banks survive in the long run? That's coming from Mr. Aneeth. And that's very important to see that whether you should be banking with the banks or you will be banking with the open banking or digital banking.
Well, I'm sure you heard the statement made by Bill Gates that we need the bank. We need to do banking, but we don't need the bankers. So what will survive is how the bank continue to deliver their value. But what will not survive is obviously the current way of doing banking, where we as a customer would need to go to them to transact our money. But now there's an opportunity for us to do whatever banking that we want to do based on the device that we purchase. But the challenge is, are we ready and smart enough to optimize the platform as well as the way the value is going to be delivered? In exchange, almost in every aspect, that our data is going to be looked at by these new banks. Because without you sharing your data, they wouldn't know what you want and what you need. So these are the challenge. And if I go back to this question, the incumbent bank in a long run, if they stay what they are, as I said just now, if you remain status quo, you will not survive. But if they digitalize and become digital bank in the right context, I think they will survive.
I think people like Mr. Aneeth will be very looking forward for the new licenses next year and hoping to go with the digital banks, and maybe those will be the change maker in the industry. I think we can keep on discussing, Mr. Ridwan. It's always pleasure to listen to you, your perspective on the topic, and it's always interesting to see that, even the audience come with diverse area to think about how, we only talk from the practitioner point of view, but if you look into from the user, those who are listening, the future work group or the future students who are going to work in, there's so much to talk about. I wish this session could have been longer, but keeping your time in perspective, I will definitely reach out to you again very soon, and maybe we have just a Q&A type of session, try to resolve some of the queries of the audience, and we will keep these questions in perspective. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Ridwan, and it was good to hear so many areas, and we wish all the best to the people who are investing in Bitcoin, to the future value of the Grab, and wish best to the anonymous group as well. Thank you very much and have a good day, Mr. Ridwan.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Professor Nafis, and also Mr. Rizwan. So time is over now. So today's session we're going to end here, but we're actually going to have another 2 more sessions today. So for those who actually just got your SPM result, you actually can join us on 5 p.m. later, which we're actually talking about the importance of selecting the right pre-U program to prepare for your future. While at 8 p.m., we're actually going to have another one actually talking about entrepreneurship, right? So stay tuned and follow our Facebook page for more updates. So once again, come to join us our APU Open Days. If let's say you still have more questions to ask or you want to get in touch with Professor Nafis, you always feel free to do that. We actually can arrange for that. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us for our live session today. Goodbye.